Welcome to another explainer. Today, we're unpacking a paper by researcher Alessandra Manzini that is honestly completely fascinating. We're looking at a concept that literally bridges the vastness of the cosmos, the ecology of our planet, and the actual everyday ways we live our lives. If you've ever felt like modern science kind of disconnects us from the broader universe, well, you're absolutely going to love the framework we're exploring today. So, what actually happens when you combine the immense scale of the cosmos with the grounded, muddy ecology of our own planet? It's a great question, right? And it totally challenges our standard mechanistic view of nature, the one that's basically dominated Western thought since the Enlightenment. Instead of seeing Earth as this closed off, isolated machine, the material we're looking at today asks us to view it as a deeply interconnected part of a massive universal web. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Decoding cosmology. 2. 3 cosmic visions. 3. The pluriverse in African humanism. 4. A new relational framework. And 5. Ecospiritual practices in action. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, Decoding Cosmology. So, cosmoecology is described as a polysemous neologism. Yeah, I know, that is a massive mouthful. But essentially, it just means this isn't some straight line singular idea. It's a word with multiple, totally distinct definitions that have popped up independently across different fields, from astrobiology all the way to philosophy. The word itself combines the Greek cosmos, meaning order or universe, and oikos, meaning environment. But because it's emerged in different academic circles to solve totally different problems, we've got to look at its distinct lineages to really grasp its power.
That brings us to Section 2, 3 cosmic visions.
The first major vision comes from Bohdan Kielczewski back in 2010. His version of cosmoecology focuses on how massive cosmic elements, stuff like solar radiation, meteorites, and lunar gravitation, literally shape the diversity and development of life on Earth. Kielczewski uses this idea to push back hard against that old mechanistic worldview of figures like Galileo and Descartes. He's arguing for a holistic, organic understanding of the universe. He actually revives the idea of an anima mundi, or world soul, where our planet's ecology is deeply, deeply sympathetic to the cosmic order. Now, a completely different approach comes from Michael Noah Mauntner. Coming from the field of astrobiology, his framework is all about human agency. Mauntner introduces what he calls a life-centered biotic ethics. In this view, humanity's ultimate cosmic purpose is to actively secure and propagate life throughout the universe. He envisions us seeding new planetary systems with microbial extremophiles or simple plants, basically using asteroid resources to do it. So in this vision, we aren't just being shaped by the cosmos, we are literally the active gardeners of the galaxy, packing our bags to go farm on asteroids. Then, we bring the focus all the way back down to Earth with our third vision from Vinciane Despret and Michel Muret. In 2016, they completely stripped away the macro-scale astrophysics and focused entirely on microcosmic everyday relationships. They looked at the really intimate entanglements between human and more than human beings, specifically studying the relationship between shepherds and sheep in the south of France. They call it a practical science of the ordinary and mundane, firmly rooted in earthly companionship. It's all about the mutual metamorphosis of humans, animals, soil, and grass. The sheer versatility of this term is honestly staggering. Think about it. On one side, we've got Mauntner talking about seeding galaxies and estimating biomass yields from comets. And on the other, Despret and Muret are focusing on the messy, everyday diplomacy of a sheep pasture. This single word, cosmoecology, spans from the absolute macro scale of universal expansion right down to the micro scale of everyday earthly survival.
Let's pivot now to Section 3, the pluriverse and African humanism.
Recently, at events like the 2022 Ateliers de la Pensée in Dakar, thinkers like Achille Mbembe proposed a seriously powerful framework. He called for a fundamental shift from the law of peoples, which is traditionally rooted in things like land appropriation and borders, over to the law of the living. Drawing deeply from African animist metaphysics, Mbembe envisions Earth as a shared terrestrial community. It's a political ecology where humanity rediscovers its cosmic dimension, and it's based on a primary right to breathe and the deep, deep interdependence of all living things. Another key concept feeding into this new synthesis comes from Arturo Escobar, who advocates for what he calls a pluriverse. Let's break down that jargon for a second. A pluriverse is, quite simply, a world where many worlds fit. Escobar critiques the singular, dominant Western worldview that strictly divides nature from culture, the view that often treats nature just as an exploitable resource. Instead, the pluriverse embraces relational ontologies. That's the idea that our very existence is defined by our relationships to everything around us. It validates indigenous and traditional ways of knowing, seeing humans and non-humans as interconnected parts of one unified web.
Moving right along to Section 4, a new relational framework.
To make all of this highly practical, the EU-funded Spiral project analyzed cross-cultural data from 73 different societies to create a new conceptual map. It lays out a pyramid where the top level is cosmoecology, understood as a worldview that recognizes our deep connections. But the really interesting part is how it flows downward. This high-level philosophy directly supports territorial livelihoods right in the center, and that's flanked by spiritual landscapes and ecospiritual practices. It essentially proves that cosmologies aren't just abstract, airy-fairy thoughts. They literally dictate how communities map out and govern their physical environments. When this worldview is actually applied, it results in relational governance, which is far more adaptive than your standard top-down planning. Communities respect territorial carrying capacity through customary law. They engage in multi-species decision-making, meaning the needs of the forest and the animals are actually at the table. They set aside secret reservoirs for spirits and ancestors, which functionally act as incredibly effective nature reserves, and they use traditional calendars that align perfectly with the reproductive times of non-human species.
And that brings us to Section 5, ecospiritual practices in action.
The paper highlights this amazing concept of spiritual landscapes. Now, these aren't just pretty pieces of nature. They are defined as cumulative, historical matrices of places where people believe spirit forces actually emerge from the environment. These spaces act as socio-ecological niches. Within these sacred groves and forests, humans and non-humans interact through really careful gestures of reciprocity. The landscape is rich with memory, and the community's belief system strictly forbids resource extraction or logging in these areas. So the crucial point here is this. These eco-spiritual practices have highly tangible ecosystem impacts. The sacralization of nature actually safeguards core forest patches from the massive deforestation pressures driven by commercial activities. When a community treats a forest as a living entity endowed with spiritual power, those customary laws enforced by traditional authorities act as unbelievable conservation tools. Drawing on systems theory, the paper suggests that humans act as the connecting structure of the cosmos, maintaining a continuous, dynamic, and metastable balance in the forest ecosystem. Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of ground today, from the macroethics of seeding the galaxy to the microdiplomacy of French shepherds, all the way to the sacred forests guarded by African cosmologies. And it all leads to one really provocative thought I want to leave you with. If we truly are an interconnected part of the cybernetic web of the cosmos, how will you reshape your own worldview? And more importantly, what material, everyday implications is that going to have for how you treat our shared living planet? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks some deep curiosity about your own place in the pluriverse.